Wow. Hey, how you guys doing? Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. Today, guys, we're gonna just get into a new little series we got going on. We're gonna start reading and learning about the Khazars and their history before they became known as something else, right? Khazars. But we're gonna go ahead and get into these two books right here. The first one is the History of the Jewish Khazars by D.M. Dunlop, and the other one is the Jews of Khazaria by Kevin Allen Brooks. We're going to read the first chapters of both books today, just an introduction into the research of the possible origins of the so-called Khazars. This is just part one. We're going to have several parts where we will be reading from these books and others on this specific series on the history of the Khazars. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to get into this book first. It's called The History of the Jewish Khazars by D.M. Dunlop. Copyrighted in 1954 from 1967. So that's the first edition. We go to chapter 1. And it says here, the emergence of the Khazars. If the commonly accepted derivation of one or two familiar words in European languages is correct, the name of the Khazars has a wider currency than we should at first suppose. The word Khazar seems originally to have been applied to irregular Hungarian cavalry. And as we shall see, the connection between the Khazars and the Magyars, the founders of the Hungarian state, is historical and certain. All right, that is a historical and certain connection. The German Ketzer heretic, listen, heretic Ketzer, heretics, has also been derived from the name of the Khazars, presumably as Jews. On the other hand, the derivation and meaning of the name are quite obscure. It is usually said that it is a participial form from the Turkish verbal stem kaz, to wander, or nomadize, nomads, so that Khazar equals nomad in parentheses, and this may be provisionally accepted. In the Slav languages, there are various words for the Khazars with an O vowel in the first syllable, and this has led to other derivations from koza, Russian pigtail, and from the stem kos, and many Slav words for goat, all right, goat. Such attempts may be discounted, as the original name is not Slav. There is not the slightest person to suppose that the Khazars are the wearers of pigtails or wearers of pigtails, or the goat herds. It is noteworthy that in Hebrew, also the name is commonly written with an O or U in parentheses vowel and pronounced Khusari. Hence, books first Korsri or Kasri, plural Khusarim. On the other hand, we have Arabic Khazar, with an impossible derivation from Aksar, an adjective denoting some affection of the eyes, small-eyed, all right, small-eyed, or slanting-eyed, almost like the Asian look. Greek Khazaroi, Khazares, occasionally Kotzer, Latin Khazari or Chesari, Khazari, Chasari. You see that? Chesar and Gazari. And in the Hebrew of the document known as the Khazar correspondence, an unvocalized form, no doubt to be pronounced Khazar, Khazar. As already said, the explanation Khazar, nomad, is perhaps to be accepted, yet Peliot has pointed to the difficulties involved. The Turkish verb kazmak, always in the sense of to hollow out, not to wander, etc., and refers to the suggestion of J. Denny that the name Khazar might be explainable by Khuzar or Khuzar, Khuzar or Khazar from Khuz, side of a mountain exposed to the north, plus Edi, Ed, in the sense of people of the north. In favor of the Denny suggestion, it may be said that no satisfactory explanation of the OU vowel in some forms of the name yet has yet been given, and B, that in ancient Armenian and Georgian, the Khazar Kagan or Kakan is repeatedly referred to as the king of the north, in Khazaria as the land of the north, which could be rendering of the native name, but the forms in the Khazar correspondence, presumably Khazar, Khazari, are on this view difficult to account for, and the Cambridge document, also written in Hebrew, offers Khazar, hardly Khuzar. Our first question here is, when did the Khazars and the Khazar name appear? There has been considerable discussion as to the relation of the Khazars to the Huns on the one hand and to the West Turks on the other. The prevalent opinion has for some time been that the Khazars emerged from the West Turkish Empire. Early references to the Khazars appear about the time when the West Turks ceased to be mentioned. Thus, they are reported to have joined forces with the Greek emperor Heraclius. All right, they joined with who? So-called Greeks, Khazars, Caesar. It's all the same people, Hellenized, Romanized people, with the Greek emperor Heraclius against the Persians in AD 627, and to have materially assisted him in the siege of Tiflis. Now remember, guys, what we've been learning about the chronologies, this could have happened in the Middle Ages, and which will coincide again with, the period where the Khazars had a big empire. It is a question whether the Khazars were at this time under West Turk supremacy. See, they don't even know if the Khazars go that far back. The chronicler Theophanes, who died in 8818, touched the hijack, maybe not, who tells the story, introduces them as the Turks from the east, whom they call Khazars, the Turks. On the other hand, the West Turks appear in the Greek writers simply as Turks, without special qualification. The Syriac historians mention the Khazars earlier than AD 627. Both Michael, Cyrus, and Bard Hebreus tell how, apparently in the region of the Greek emperor Maurice, 3 brothers from Inner Scythia marched west with 30,000 men, and when they reached the frontier of the Greeks, one of them, Bulgarius, but Hebreus, Bulgaris, right, Hebreus, he's a Hebreu, crossed the Don and settled within the empire. The others occupied the country of the Alans, which is called Barsalia. They and the former inhabitants adopted the name of Khazars from Khazarik, the eldest of the brothers. Khazar from Khazarik is named after somebody? Progenitor? If as seems possible, the story goes back to John of Ephesus, who died in circa AD 586 supposedly, right? In the false chronologies. It is contemporary with the alleged event. It states pretty explicitly that the Khazars arrived at the Caucasus from Central Asia toward the end of the 6th century. In the Greek writer Theophylact Simokata, circa 620, we have an almost contemporary account of events among the West Turks, which can hardly be unrelated to the Syriac story just mentioned. Speaking of a Turkish embassy to Maurice in 598, this author describes how in past years the Turks had overthrown the White Huns, Hephthalites, the Ivars, and Uyghurs who lived on the Til, which the Turks call the Black River. These Uyghurs, says Theophylact, were descended from 2 chiefs called Vad and Huni. They are mentioned elsewhere as the Varchonites. Some of the Uyghurs escaped from the Turks, and appearing in the West were regarded by those whom they met as Avars. All right, so you have people being called different things depending on where they go by different people, by which name they were generally known. The last part of this is confirmed by another Greek author, according to whom Justinian received representatives of the pseudo-Avars, properly Uyghurs, in AD 558. And again, all this might be happening in the Middle Ages. And I look into according to whom, according, supposedly, all right, shows the primary sources. After which they turned to plundering and laying waste the lands of Eastern and Central Europe. If the derivation from Uyghur is right, the word ogre in folklore may date from this early period. So, when I'm saying, the chronology is my buff, I bet you we go to this source is going to give us somebody from Middle Ages quoting a so-called ancient Greek. It's not the primary source. That's what we've been learning. Theophylact also tells us that about the time of the Turkish embassy in 598, there was another emigration of fugitives from Asia into Europe involving the tribes of the Harniak, Khazars, and Sabender. These were like the previous arrivals, descendant of Var and Huni, and they proved their kinship by joining the so-called Avars, really Uyghurs, under the Khan of the latter. All right, so this kind of mixes in with the other book we've been reading about the ancient and modern Britons. Remember, there's a invasion, a wave of Huns. They were calling the Black Huns, Black invaders, and also there was letting you know there was light-skinned Huns. So there was dark-skinned Huns and light-skinned Huns. In that book, they're letting us know about these waves that they're talking about here, some immigration of fugitives who went into Europe. It is difficult not to see in this another version of the story given by Michael Cyrus and Bar Hebreus. The Khazars are undoubtedly a Bulgar group, while Sabender should be the same name as Samandar, an important Khazar town, and hence correspond to Khazari in the Syriac. Originally, it seems Samander derived his name from the occupying tribe. We appear to have confirmation that the Khazars had arrived in Eastern Europe by the reign of Maurice, having previously been in contact with the West Turks and destined to be so again. On the other hand, the older view implied that the Khazars were already on the outskirts of Europe before the rise of the Turks, circa AD 550. According to this view, the affinities of the Khazars were with the Huns. When Priscus, the envoy to Attila, in 448 spoke of a people subject to the Huns and living in Scythia toward the Pontus called Akatsir, these were simply Khazars. Example, white Khazars. That means there's so-called black ones if there's white ones. Jordanes, writing circa 552, mentions the Akatsirs as a warlike nation who do not practice agriculture but live by pasturing flocks and hunting. In view of the distinction among some Turkish peoples between the leading clans of a confederacy as white and the remainder as black, so-called white, when we read in the Arab geographer Istakri that the Khazars are of two kinds, one called Kara, Khazars, remember Kara means black. See, black Khazars, in parentheses, Kara, Khazars, the other a white kind, unnamed. Unnamed, huh? It is a natural assumption that the latter are the Khazars or white Khazars. The identification of the Akatsirs with Khazars was rejected by Seuss, who's Seuss, and Marquardt, all, more modern people, and impossible linguistically. Marquardt further said that historically the Akatsirs as a subject race correspond rather to the Black Khazars. The alternative identification proposed is Akatsirs Agacheri, but this may not be very different from the other if Seki Validi is right in thinking that the relation between the Agacheri and the Khazars was close. There are one or two facts in favor of the older view which have not been explained away effectively. If the Khazars had nothing to do with the Khazars and appeared first as an offshoot of the West Turks at the end of the 6th century, how did they come to be mentioned in the Syriac compilation of circa 569, going under the name of Zacharias Rhetor? The form Khazar Hasid, which here comes in a list of peoples belonging to the general neighborhood of the Caucasus, refers evidently to the Khazars. This would fit in well with their existence in the same region a century earlier. We have also the testimony of the so-called geographer of Ravenna, possibly 7th century, they don't know, that the Agassidi of Jordanes are the Khazars. The Khazars, however, are nowhere represented simply as Huns. The question arises if they were subjugated by the latter shortly before AD 448. As Priscus tells, how long had they existed previously? Here we must consider the views of Seki Validi, which are put forward exclusively on the basis of Oriental sources and are quite independent of the considerations which have just been raised. He believes that he has found traces of one of the same Urgeshite of the Turks, not only in Muslim but also in Chinese sources, the latter going as far back as the Wei dynasty. In the story of the Khazars, play a leading part and even claim to be autochthonous in their country. Seki Validi cites a story in Gardisi, according to which the eponymous ancestor of the Kyrgyz, having killed a Roman officer, fled to the court of the Khazar Khakan and later went eastward till he found a permanent settlement on the Yenisei. But as the Kyrgyz in early times are believed to have lived in Eastern Europe and to have been south of the Urals before the beginning of the Christian era, Seki Validi would assign a corresponding date to this episode and is unwilling to allow that the mention of Khazars thus early is an anachronism. These are remarkable claims to make for antiquity of the Khazars. The principal Muslim sources which Seki Validi relies on are relatively late, relatively late, listen, Gardisi circa AD 1050, that's close to the Middle Ages now. These are where the sources really start popping out from. There is no earlier writings. And an anonymous history, the Mujmal al-Tawarik wal Qisas, somewhat later, though these doubtless go back to Ibn al-Muqaffa in the 8th century, and through him to pre-Islamic Persian sources. Nor does his Chinese source mention the Khazars explicitly, but the view that the Khazars existed anterior to the Huns gains some confirmation from another quarter. The Armenian history, going under the name of Moses of Korin, 5th century, has a story which mentions the Khazars in the 20 years between AD 197 and 217. According to this, the peoples of the north, the Khazars and Basilians, made an agreement to break through the pass of Kor at the east end of the Caucasus under their general and king Benaseb Surhab. Having crossed the river Kurd, they were met by the Armenian Balarch with a great army and driven back northward in confusion. Sometime later, on their own side of the Caucasus, the northern nations again suffered a heavy defeat. Balarch was killed in this second battle. His son succeeded him, and under the new king, the Armenians again passed the Caucasus in strength, defeating and completely subjugating the Khazars and Basilians. 1 in every 100 was taken as a hostage, and a monument in Greek letters was set up to show that these nations were under the jurisdiction of Rome. This seems to be a very factual account, and by Khazars, certainly the Khazars are to be understood, all right? So who were the Khazars under? The jurisdiction of Rome, it is them. Khazar, Caesar, Caesar, Caesar. It is, however, generally held that the Armenian history is wrongly ascribed to Moses of Corinth in the 5th century and should be assigned to the 9th. Listen, he's letting you know this is not a false chronology video, but it's telling you there is phantoms and duplicates and there is errors in chronology. He's letting you know here it should be assigned to the 9th, or at any rate to the 8th century. This would clearly put quite a different complexion on the story of the Khazar raid. Exactly. If we start looking at when these events really happen, it changes everything. Instead of being unexceptionable evidence for the existence of the Khazars at all events in the time of Moses of Corinth, it would fall into line with other Armenian and also Georgian accounts which, though they refer to the Khazars more or less explicitly in the first centuries of the Christian era, and even much earlier, we do not cite here, though interesting in themselves. These accounts in which of their imprecision and lack of confirmation cannot be regarded as reliable. All these so-called ancient sources, you know, and look what he's telling you. A lot of this literally is coming out in the Middle Ages and medieval times, all these Greek writings and all these ancient sources. The Muslim writers provide us with a considerable amount of material which may be expected to throw light on the date of the emergence of the Khazars. As already indicated, some of this demonstrably derives from Pahlavi or Levi sources composed before the Arab conquest of Persia. What the Arabic and Persian writers have to say about the Khazars deserves careful scrutiny, as liable to contain authentic information from an earlier time. It is not surprising that these accounts, written when the Khazar state north of the Caucasus was flourishing, distinguished them from the Turks encountered by the first generations of Muslims in Central Asia. But a passage like the following, where the Khazars are set aside by side or set side by side with the leading types of contemporary humanity, is somewhat remarkable. You see that? No, they're actually a lot closer, contemporary humanity, a lot closer in history. In a discussion between the celebrated Ibn al-Muqaffa and his friends, the question was raised as to what nation was the most intelligent. It is significant for the low state of their culture at the time, or at least for the view held by the Arabs on the subject. Ibn al-Muqaffa died 142, 750. Oh, I don't know what that means. That the Turks and Khazars were suggested only after the claims of the Persians, Greeks, Chinese, Indians, and Negroes had been canvassed. Evidently, in this respect, the Turks and the Khazars shared a bad eminence, but they are given quite different characteristics. The Turks are lean dogs, the Khazars pasturing cattle. Though the judgment is unfavorable, we get the impression of the Khazars as a distinct, even important racial group. How far this corresponds with the fact is not certain. Suggestions have been made connecting the Khazars with the Circassian type. Taken to be pale complexioned, dark-haired and blue-eyed, and through the Basilians or Barsilians already mentioned with the so-called royal skits of Herodotus, all this evidently very speculative, very speculative. Apart from the passage where the black Khazars are mentioned, described as being dusky, like the Indians, and their counterparts fair and handsome. The only available description of the race in Arabic sources is the following, apparently from Ibn Sa'id al-Maghribi. As to the Khazars, they are to the left north of the inhabited earth towards the seventh clime, having over their heads the constellation of the plough. Their land is cold and wet, hence their complexions are white, their eyes blue, their hair flowing and predominantly reddish, their bodies large and their natures cold. Their natures, cold natures, people. Their general aspect is wild. This reads like a conventional description of a northern nation, and in any case affords no kind of support for Khazar affinity with the Circassian type. If we are to trust the etymology of Khalil ibn Ahmad, the Khazars may have been slant-eyed, like the Mongols, etc. Evidently, nothing can be said positively in the matter, Some of the Khazars may have been fair-skinned, with dark hair and blue-eyed, all right? Some of them, yeah, but there is no evidence that this type prevailed from antiquity or was widely represented in Khazaria in historical time. Doesn't mean everybody was so-called white. Even again, the Khazars had black Khazars. A similar discussion on the merits of the different races and reported from the days before Muhammad, in which the speakers are the Arab Numan ibn al-Mundir of Al-Hira and Kushra Anu Shirwan. The Persian gives his opinion that the Greeks, Indians, and Chinese are superior to the Arabs, and so also, in spite of their low material standards of life, the Turks and the Khazars, who at least possess an organization under their kings. Here again, the Khazars are juxtaposed with the great nations of the East. All right, so this guy is saying all these other people are greater. What so-called Greeks? What Indians? Hindustan, so there's a lot of people there. It is consonant with this that tales were told of how ambassadors from the Chinese, the Turks, and the Khazars were constantly at Khusraw's gate, and even that he kept 3 thrones of gold in his palace, which were never removed, and on which none sat, preserved for the kings of Byzantium, China, and the Khazars. In general, the material in the Arabic and Persian writers with regard to the Khazars in early times falls roughly into 3 groups, centering respectively round the names of A, or one or other of the Hebrew patriarchs. Listen, Alexander the Great, and C, certain of the Sassanid kings, especially Anushirwan and his immediate successors. A typical story of the first group is given by Jacobi in his history. After the confusion of tongues at Babel, the descendants of Noah came to Peleg, son of Eber, and asked him to divide the earth among them. The days when the earth was divided, right? Does it mean destruction? Or does it just mean division of lots? So he said they asked him, can you divide the earth among them? He apportioned to the descendants of Japhet, China, Hind, Sindh, the country of the Turks, and that of the Khazars, as well as Tibet, the country of the Volga, Bulgars, Dalam, and the country neighboring on Khorasan. In another passage, Jacobi gives a kind of sequel to this. Peleg, having divided the earth in this fashion, the descendants of Amur ibn Tubal, the son of Japhet, went out to the northeast. One group, the descendants of Togarma, proceeding farther north, were scattered in different countries and became a number of kingdoms, among them the Burjan, the Bulgars, Alans, Khazars, and Armenian Khazars, all right, all from Japhet, coming from Japhet. We knew that, right? Similarly, according to Tabari, there were born 2 Japhet, Jamar, the biblical Gomer, Ma, read Magua or Magog, Madai or Madai, Jawan, Javan, Jawan, or Yawan, Yawan, Javan. So-called some of the Greeks, Tubal, Maj, J, read Mashk, Meshach, and Tirs or Tiras. Of the descendants of the last were the Turks and the Khazars. There is possibly an association here with the Turkish survivors of the West Turks who were defeated by the Arabs in 119, 737, whatever that means, and disappeared as a ruling group in the same century. Tabari says, curiously, that of the descendants of Magog were Jajush and Majush, all right, he's talking about Magog, adding that these are to the east of the Turks and Khazars. This information would invalidate Sheki Validi's attempt to identify Gog and Magog in the Arabic writers with the Norwegians. The name Mashek is regarded by him as probably a singular to the classical Masajetai, Masajet. A. Bashmakov emphasizes the connection of Meshech with the Khazars to establish his theory of the Khazars not as Turks from Inner Asia, but what we call a Japhetic or Alarodian group from south of the Caucasus. All right. So still, to me, they're trying to say, well, is they Turks or are they from Japhet? I mean, most Turks come out of Japhet anyway, so still the same line, right? Still the same progenitor. Evidently, there is no stereotype form of this legendary relationship of the Khazars to Japhet. The Taj al-Aruz says that according to some, they are the descendants of Mash or Mashk or Meshech, for Meshech, son of Japhet. And according to others, both the Khazars and the Sakaliba are sprung from Tubal, another son, right, coming out of Japhet. Further, we read of Balanjar, Ibn Japhet in Ibn al-Fakin and Abu al-Fida as the founder of the town of Balanjar. Usage leads one to suppose that this is equivalent to giving Balanjar a separate racial identity. In historical times, Balanjar was a well-known Khazar center, which is even mentioned by Mas'udi as their capital. All right, that was the Khazar capital. It is hardly necessary to cite more of these Japhet stories. Their Jewish origin is a priori obvious, and Polyak has drawn attention to one version of the division of the earth where the Hebrew words for north and south actually appear in the Arabic text. The Iranian cycle of legend had a similar tradition according to which the hero Afridun divided the earth among his sons, Tush, sometimes Tur, the eponym of Turan, all right, Turan, listen, Salm and Irash. Here the Khazars appear with the Turks and the Chinese in the portion assigned to Tush, the eldest son. So as I go along, I see that I think that a lot of the time the confusion is whether who they originate from is because, the Khazar was an empire. They had a lot of other nations there, a lot of the Turks, a lot of these other, these names they're mentioned, Iranian, Persian kind of, these are all, a lot of them coming out of Japhet still. They're mixing with some of the Semitic people and Hamite people, but in general, a lot of these nations are coming out of Japhet, and they were eventually part of the Khazar Empire, and they become Khazars because of that. All right. So again, they're going over a lot of different theories over the historical years, that, they were talking about different people, about the possible origin of the Khazars. So that's why we're kind of going over this first chapter, guys, so you can understand. But you get kind of the sense of who these people might be based on the region they are, who they're saying they might be related to. All right, we're going to keep learning and reading, though, all right? So we're going to get into this book as well. It's called The Jews of Khazaria. This is by Kevin Allen Brooke. So it says here, copyright 2006, 1999 by Kevin Allen Brooke. And so we're just going to get a little bit of what he's saying, or the research he's done about the origins of the Khazars, as it says here in chapter 1. It says, for millennia, wandering bands of nomads lived in the steppes of Central Asia and southern Russia. Yet contrary to popular belief, these nomads possess culture and other traits of civilized life. Some of the most spectacular archaeological finds anywhere in the world have been discovered in the grasslands of Ukraine and Russia. The Scythians, warriors of Iranian origin, were one of the earliest societies in the steppe. All right, dodge the hijack. Scythians, Sikae, Skae, or Saxons, and many of their rich treasures have come to light. They were great patrons of the arts who commissioned Greek artists. In the summer of 1996, the tomb of a Scythian military commander was found near Rysanivka village in Ukraine, containing a gold-handled sword, a headdress decorated with gold, wine jars, and silver decorations. Another exciting discovery was the Scythian gold pictorial from Tolstaya Mogila along the Dnieper River, which contained detailed engravings of animals and people. At other grave sites, Scythians were buried along with large quantities of gold bracelets, rings, and tiaras. Centuries after the Scythian society disappeared, there we go. They disappeared. They went extinct, just like the Karankawa, right? Just like the Mayas, who was the real Scythians. They became the Saxons, sons of Isaac. Other societies made their mark in the steppes, including the Sarmatians, who are related to the Sumerians, the Huns, and Khazars. As the historian Peter Golden has noted, many of the early Central Asian nomads took a deep interest in trade and succeeded in building rich civilizations with literacy and high levels of political, social, military organization. According to Golden, the picture of the nomad as simply a mounted marauder, while justified from the point of view of those who felt the fury of their attacks, does not tell the full story. The Turkic civilizations of Central Asia were often just as culturally rich as that of the Scythians. In August 2001, Turkish archaeologists excavating a shrine in central Mongolia discovered the ancient tomb of the Kok Turk Hagan Bilge, or Bilge, who ruled from 716 to 734. The tomb contained thousands of works of art made from silver and gold, such as silver sculptures of deer and a gold crown decorated with a mythological bird figurine. The Khazars emerged on the world scene as Turkic horsemen, all right, who believed in shamanism and lived a nomadic lifestyle. Over the course of many centuries, the Khazars adopted a more settled way of life and replaced their former Tengri beliefs with Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Khazars. This chapter explores the evolution of the Khazars into a tribe and the earliest development of their kingdom. And it says here the Turkic heritage. The Khazars were predominantly Turkic and probably originated in the steppes of Central Asia, or perhaps in the Ural or Caucasus Mountains. The details of their origins are still somewhat obscure. The early 9th century Greek historian Theophanes wrote that the Khazars were Eastern Turks. The Arab chronicler at al-Masudi recorded in Kitab at-Tam bin wa al-Ishraf that the Khazars are a tribe of the Turks. The Chinese chronicle Tiang Shu likewise declared that the Khazars belonged to the stock of the Turks. Writers in the centuries following the demise of Khazaria reinforced this knowledge. The 12th century religious scholar Rabbi Jehuda ben Barzilai of Barcelona referred to the Khazars, who are Turks. The 13th century Polish writer Martinos Opaviensis called the Khazars Turks when referring to them as Justinian's second one-time allies in the Crimea. Turkish and Jewish genealogical myths recorded by King Joseph and Sefer Josephon identified Khazar as the brother of other Turkic tribes like the Bulgars and Sabirs. All right? Syriac legends said that the ancestors of the Khazars was named Khazarik, the brother of Bulgarius. Most scholars believe that these legends have a historical basis and that the Khazars were indeed closely related to Turkic tribes such as the Bulgars and Bashkirs. According to Turkic legend, as preserved in Chinese chronicles, the original Turks lived beside a large swamp. Enemies killed them off, with the exception of one boy, whose feet they cut off and whom they threw into a marsh. A female wolf rescued the boy. Years later, the boy impregnated the wolf. When the leaders of his enemies hired someone to kill the boy and the wolf fled to a cave in a mountain north of the Turfan Depression in eastern Turkestan, which today is in the northwestern China. The wolf gave birth to 10 sons in the cave. A wolf, huh? One of the 10 sons was named Al-Shithna, and his tribe became powerful and expanded greatly. in size. All 10 sons settled along the southern slope of the Altai Mountains, came under the control of the Huan, and became blacksmiths. Ashina adopted the name Turk. The legend indicates that the wolf is the totem ancestor of the Turks. So they really, because, we know that wolf also, I think Benjamin is labeled, tribe of Benjamin is wolf. So how much more relations with Hebrew or Israelites do these people have? Remember they said Japhet would dwell in the tents of Shem. Are they taking all the prestige history and making it theirs, is what I'm trying to say. But as you guys can see, Khazars, very, very Japhetic, coming related to these Japhetic tribes, so-called Turks. As was the case with most nomadic Turks, the Khazars were racially and ethnically mixed, all right? This is what I was saying, mixed. Among the Turks were black-haired peoples with dark brown eyes, red-haired peoples with green or hazel eyes, and fair-haired people with blue eyes. Some had high cheekbones, white faces, and narrow eyes, resembling the peoples of East Asia. Many others resembled Europeans or Middle Easterners. The diversity of the Turks is also made apparent by the fact that the term Turk is not a racial term, but rather was applied to a variety of different nomadic tribes who shared a common vocabulary and culture. The heterogeneity of the Turks is still apparent today, since the disparate modern Turkic peoples often look strikingly similar. For example, the Gagauz people of Europe differ from the Kazakhs of Central Asia, just as Azeris of the South Caucasus differ from Uyghurs of northwestern China. In certain instances, this diversity can be explained by the frequent process by which diverse peoples originally of non-Turkic origin were Turkicized and adopted Turkic as their language. The Khazars were described by Ibn Said al-Maghribi as having blue eyes, light skin, and reddish hair. Many other early Turkic tribes also had red hair. Chinese and Muslim sources indicated that the ancient Kyrgyz or Kyrgyz people living north of Sayan Mountains along the upper Yenisei River had red hair, blue eyes, and white skin. For example, Gardisi reported a legend of the origin of the Kyrgyz people, wherein a Khazar nobleman named Bashkir befriended the Saklabs or Slavs and called another group of people whom he led the Kyrgyz. He added that it was said that the Saklabs or Slavs mixed with the Kyrgyz, all right, mixed, and that this explains the incidence of red hair and white skin among the Kyrgyz. The Tiangshu Chronicle said that the Kyrgyz people were tall with red hair, ruddy-faced and blue-eyed, ruddy-faced. Black hair is considered a bad omen. The red hair of the Kyrgyz might mean that they were partly of some non-Turkic origin. A Hisyun-Nu ruler in the early 4th century had a red beard, and the Shi-Ku said that the Hu people descended from the Wu Sun, neighbors of the Hisyun-Nu, had red beards and blue eyes. On the other hand, Al-Tagri said that Khazars had black hair. Al-Istakri added that there were black Khazars, here we go again. There was so-called black Khazars and white Khazars, alleging that the latter were light-skinned and handsome, while the former were dark-skinned. All right, they are talking about complexion when they say black, they mean dark. All right, so-called Negro Khazars. However, scholars agreed that this was not a racial distinction, but rather a social one. So the black Kara Khazars were of the lower classes, but they were dark-skinned. Kara does mean black, guys. While the white Khazars were the nobility and royalty. That's probably how they set it up, like a caste system, just like in Hindustan, right? Just like in India. When Soviet archaeologists excavated Khazarian kurgans, burial mounds, near the fortress of Sarkel, dating from the 10th to 12th centuries, They discovered physical remains that apparently were of members of the Khazar tribe. Some of these Khazars belonged to a Slavic type, while others were short-skulled Europeans, you know, possibly your black Khazars. Only a few Mongolian types were found. So you see how they had like a caste system where they were making the lighter Khazars, the royalty nobles. So what if they were the ones who spread this all over the world, go to Hindustan, going everywhere, even until today, that whole white privilege, all that. Alternative theories have been proposed about the origins of the Khazar people throughout the years. In the 19th century, some scholars considered the Khazars to be Turks or Tartars, while others said they were Finno-Ugrians related to the Magyars. Still others argued that the Khazars were Slavs or related to the Circassians. A large number of possibilities were raised in the following century as well. And his PhD thesis, Struktur und, and that's the whole name right there, is in German, I believe, Dieter Ludwig suggested that the Khazars were Hephthalites, allegedly Turkic, originating from Khorasan, eastern Persia, who formed a union with the Sabirs around the 6th century. Warren B. Walsh claimed that the Khazars were related to the Georgians and Armenians, right? So here goes the same theories over and over, right, guys? So they're giving you the possible other origins, but still you kind of see who these people are kind of related to and who they're mixing with, whatever their true origin are. And we're talking about what happened to the seed of Cain, huh? Did they start mixing with Japhet's people? The scholars who have had the easiest access to Khazar documents and artifacts are naturally those in Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, the communist conceptualization of history skewed analysis of the ethnogenesis of tribes in the Russian lands during much of the 20th century, as Bruce Trigger explained. The Soviet Union was the first country where archaeological data were interpreted within the framework of Marxist historical materialism. Since the late 1920s, this paradigm has guided all archaeological research done there. This ideology had drastic consequences for Khazar studies. Under the oppressive regime of Stalin, Soviet historians and archaeologists were forced to adopt the view that the Khazars were not Turkic migrants from the east, but rather were natives of the North Caucasus. Mikhail Artamonov therefore alleged during the 1930s and 1940s that the Khazars were local natives of the Don Valley and the North Caucasus. Lev Gumilev and several other archaeologists expressed the belief that the Khazars were a Turkified, Dagestani, Sarmatian, or Alanic people. All right, a little bit of the Sumerians there. Again, I would say a little bit of seed of Cain, mixing with all these people, becoming known as Khazars. Vladimir Minorsky, too, wrote that the Khazars were a grouping of local nomadic tribes of southern Russia who were brought together under a new Khazar Turkic leader. The view that the Khazars were mainly or entirely a Turkified people does not appear to be valid, since it is known for certain that the Khazars were Turks. However, there remains a possibility that some non-Turkic people under the jurisdiction of the Khazar Empire also assumed the name Khazar, all right? Especially Jewish immigrants from the Middle East who intermarried with the Khazars. When we're talking about real Hebrew, possibly Israelite people coming out, right? The meaning of the etononym Khazar has been much debated. According to some scholars, Khazars may be derived from the root word Khaz, meaning wanderer, and meaning man. On the other hand, Douglas Dunlop believed it was possible to associate the Khazars with the Chinese name of one of the 9 ancient Uyghur tribes, Kosa. Some early Chinese writers knew the Khazars under the names Koosa, Tu Chue, Kosa Turks, and Tu Chuen Hosapu. And Dunlop's argument is largely based on the close resemblance between Kosa and Kuza, that almost sounds like Kuza, and Khazar studies. Peter Golden disagreed with Dunlop's suggestion, writing that a connection between the Khazars and Uyghurs cannot be established, and that the real connection existed with the Uyghurs. Early Russian sources called the Khazars the White Ugri, and the Magyars the Black Ugri. All right, we got that in ancient and modern Britons. Remember that? It should be assumed that Ugri is equivalent to Oghur. The Oghurs were a special branch of Turks who spoke a form of Turkic distinct from Common Turkic. More recently, however, scholars have reevaluated the question of whether Khazars can be associated with Uyghurs, since some new evidence has been discovered that may connect the Khazars with people of the ancient Uyghur Empire. The reevaluation involves the name Khazar. Khazar was found in the form KSR on the mid-8th century Shine Usu, Terking, and Tes runic inscriptions from northern Mongolia, all of which were composed in the old Uyghur language. And one of the runic inscriptions, the Ugur Kagan Bayanchur el Etmishpilka, reigned 747 to 759, wrote that the Khazars were involved in events of the 6th century. Tosenga believed that the Uyghur tribe of surname Khazar may be equivalent to the Kosa of the Chinese sources. There has been speculation that part of the Khazar group moved west from Mongolia or northern Kazakhstan into Khazaria, but this is far from certain. Karoli Segletti and Louis Basin proposed that the Khazars were the ancestors of the Khazars. Bazin argued that this Uyghur group migrated westward before the year 555, and he suggested that Khaz, meaning to tyrannize, oppress, terrorize, oppress, terrorize, just like they do today, the Khazars. Sesegleri argued that the westward migration of the Khazars occurred around 463. It is interesting that the multi-tribal Chui Hsing 9 surnames confederacy conquered by the Uyghur Khagan included a tribal leader named Kosa. According to the Chinese work Hsing Tangshu, additionally, it should be noted that the Khagan of the Uyghur Empire between 823 and 832 was named Hosa Tele Hasarteking. Were these leaders related to the Khazars? Senga postulated that Kosa was the surname of the leader of the Su Xian Sikari tribe, possibly associated with the Tie Le group rather than with Uyghurs, and that it was the Tie Le who were the ancestors of the Khazar people. More recently, Andras Ronatas connected Khazar with the ancient Roman title Caesar. All right, it's all connected. They infiltrated a lot of different of the heathen nations, guys. That's also what they did. Caesar Khazar. This title in turn derived from the Latin name Julius Caesar. The word Caesar was transmitted to the Turks via the Persians. In Middle Persian, the name took the form Khazar. Dan Shapira concurred with Ronatas' analysis. A complete answer about the origins of the Khazars is not yet available. However, it should be emphasized that the evidence indicates the importance of westward migrations in the creation of the Khazar people. All right. All right, so we're going to continue again. This is chapter 1 of the Jews of Khazaria book. It says here legends about the beginnings of the Jewish Khazars. All right, some of the Turkic peoples believed that they could trace their descent back to Noah, the legendary ark builder, through the biblical character Togarma. All right, that's Japhet. Through where? Through Japhet. One of the most important Khazar kings, Joseph, wrote in his celebrated reply to Hasdai ibn Shaprut that the Khazars were descended from Khazar, the seventh of Togarma's 10 sons, the others being Uyghur, Tiros, Avar, Ogus or Ogur, Bisal or Barsil, Tarna, Sanar, Bulgar, and Savird. So again, a lot of the Turkic tribes come out of these famous 7 brothers, or 7 or 8. Other medieval Hebrew essays substantiated this claim. And we're going to get into all those documents, guys. For example, the anonymous 10th century Hebrew historical work Sefer Josephon stated that Togarma's son Khazar had 9 brothers who represented the ancestry of the Bulgars, Pechenegs, and other Turkic groups. Genesis 10:2 and 10:3 in turn trace Togarma's ancestry back several generations, naming Japhet as his grandfather and Noah as Japhet's father. It is also worth mentioning that Shem, Tov Ibn Shem, Tov called Khazaria, the country of Togarma, in his Sefer HaEmunot, early 15th century. Jewish authors often speculated that the Jews in Khazaria were descended from some of the 12 tribes of ancient Israel. Now, this is where, it gets pretty interesting because, I believe early on in the Khazarian Empire, you're going to read why they were there, but yeah, that they had some kind of mixture with some kind of Israelite. That's the only way they could have got the authority and been able to convert and even establish royalty claims, right? The scepter will always be with Judah, right? So let's read what it says. It says, for example, the Khazar, author of the Schechter letter, mentioned a tradition among his people that the Khazarian Jews were descended from the tribe of Simeon. All right. That's a generalization right there. Similarly, Eldad ben Mahalid Hadanai, or Dani, Eldad the Danite, all right, Eldad the Danite. We're going to get more into him. I was going to read on him. I mentioned him in my Danite videos, but I was going to read a whole chapter of Eldad the Danite's book. But I left that for another video so we can get into his writings. All right. Again, Danites. Yes, Danites we know were all over the earth. They were seafarers. They were mixing a lot with a lot of the heathen nations. So, that Israelite element could maybe have come from Danites. A Jew who may have hailed from Eastern Africa or Khazaria. Which one is it? That's two different places. A Jew from Khazaria, Eldad the Danite, wrote in the late 9th century that the tribe of Simeon and the half-tribe of Menashe lived in the land of Khazars and took tribute from 25 kingdoms, including some Muslim nations. So the Israelites are there to collect tribute being paid to them, right? Didn't they say Japhet would dwell in the tents of Shem? Oh, you're paying tribute to the Israelites. Oh yeah, to Shem. Eldad brought this to the attention of the Jews of Spain, or the Sephardic Jews, right, in 883 and aroused considerable interest in the topic among them. Several other versions of the Eldad Hadanai legend exist in Hebrew literature. A large assortment of these tales concerning the whereabouts of the remnants of the 12 tribes of Israel were collected in the Chronicles of Jaramil by Jaramil ben Solomon, a 12th century Italian Jew. One of the documents in Jaramil's collection is the Chronicle of Elkanan the Merchant, which was said to be written by Elkanan ben Joseph, a seafaring merchant from the land where the tribe of Dan dwelled. All right, a merchant, possibly a Danite. This chronicle, that's preserved by Jeramel, is more detailed from Eldad's tale and provides valuable additional information. All right, that's what we're going to get into one day. Elkanan's chronicle indicated that the tribe of Judah and half of the tribe of Simeon lived in tents in the land of the Khazdim. They collected tribute from 25 kingdoms, including Muslims and descendants of Keturah, Abraham's second wife. They over there, not because they Khazars, but because they collecting tribute. All right, remember, Prester John, King David was the king of kings. Mad kings, mad nations paid tribute to him. And he got his people going to collect it. And that's why they were there. They were described as proficient archers, right? Bow and arrow, and sword fighters. They say the Saxons and all these people in ancient British Isles were. What we just talking about, right? Israelites who warred against non-Jewish nations and at times went on excursions to Iraq. Elkanan said that Judah and Simeon spoke Hebrew, Greek, they've been Hellenized, and the language of Togarma, Turkic. Why? Because they dealt with these people. Japhet dwelled in the tents of Shem, and that they were knowledgeable about the Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, and Agadah. It is obvious that these statements, like those in the tale narrated by Eldad, refer to the Jews living in Khazaria. Dan Shapira showed how the term Khazdim, spelled Khazrim, in some versions of the tale, equaled Khazars in its meaning. The other document from the Chronicles of Jerahmeel that provides details about the lost tribes in the Caucasus region is titled The 10 Banishments of the Sanhedrin. The details in this document sometimes contradict those in Elkanan's account. For example, the tribe of Ephraim and the half-tribe of Menashe, rather than Simeon and Judah, were said to be collecting tribute from 25 kingdoms. So they keep getting the tribes mixed up, but they know they were there to collect tribute. And look how many kingdoms they're collecting tribute. Ephraim and Menashe formed a large confederation of hard-working horse riders. Horse originated in the Americas, horse riders who lived opposite the city of Mejuka. There was also believed to be a connection between the Khazars and Magog, all right, a son of Japhet, Magog. The life of Saint Abel of Tbilisi, said that the Khazars were savage, sons of Magog, all right, sons of Magog who were without religion except that they recognized a God, the creator. Because you got to understand, they're coming from Magog, they're still Japhet, Japhet's still the son of Noah. According to Expositio in Mattheum Evangelistum, a commentary on Matthew 24:14, written in 864 by the monk Christian of Stavelot, the Jewish Khazari or Khazaris, Khazars, Khazaris, Gaza, Khazaris, Khazars, Gaza, wow, lived in the land of Gog and Magog. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan wrote in 921 and 922, some hold the opinion that Gog and Magog are the Khazars. All right, Gog and Magog are what? The Khazars. The Talmud, however, identified Magog with the White Huns and Gog with the Goths. Josephus, writing in the 1st century, associated Magog with the Scythians. Touch the hijack. Christian of Stavelot added that Alexander the Great enclosed or shut in the Khazari, but that they had escaped. So who he shut in? Not white people, but the Khazars. Listen to this. Alexander the Great, possible Israelite, enclosed or shut in the Khazars, but they escaped. This statement is derived from an ancient legend in which Alexander was seen as a hero for walling up dangerous, unclean peoples. Prester John described the enclosed peoples as cannibals. All right, who was Prester John? Prester John King David described the enclosed people as cannibals. Who? The Khazars. Listen, deep history right now. Shout out to 432, the Drop Radio YouTube channel. He got a whole Prester John educational series. He's like on like number 130, almost 140, you know. The Cosmography by Pseudo Aeticus Istricus, written circa 770, stated, other writings omit the Turks, equal Khazars living near the Black and Azov Seas. He says that they are closed in by the Birichian Mountains and the isles of the Tarakontas, and right to the Bay of the Pontus by its lands and littorals. They are people from the stock of Gog and Magog, along with their offspring. The very worst, they are a race pendant behind the Caspian gates. They have a tall stature, are sooty, foul, with acutely pointed teeth. Huh? Pointed teeth? You guys listening? Your Khazars, your Khazars. The medieval German legend of the Red Jews derived from a combination of 3 of these stories about Alexander the Great's enclosure of monstrous nations behind a large mountain northeast of the Mediterranean, about Gog and Magog, said to be the destroyers of the world at the end of time. All right, what are we? Are we at the end of time? And 3 about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They're being found today. German writers used the Red Jews legend to express anti-Jewish sentiments and fears about the anticipated apocalypse. The term Red Jews was chosen because medieval Germans saw red hair and red beards as signs of a dishonest, deceitful individual. Those red Jews were Jews who had red hair and red beards, according to Andrew Goh. This is visually demonstrated in 15th century German historiated Bible, all right? Listen to this, which depicted the 10 lost tribes of Israel enclosed by Alexander with red hair and red beards. That's the hijack. By contrast, Alexander, his army had blonde hair. The red Jews made their first appearance in German literature, and Albrecht von Scharfenberg's late 13th century text titled Der Jüngere Titurel. According to Albrecht, the red Jews are enclosed between two tall mountains called Gog and Magog. These Jews are warlike and present a military threat to Christians. Another late 13th century document, Der Gottweger Trojaner Krieg, stated that the red Jews lived in the land of Blutzen, a country that stretched far and wide. It also said that the red Jews taxed travelers very heavily, and that they looked ugly and frightening. It further said that after 20,000 red Jews were killed in battle against Greek soldiers, the remnants of red Jewry fled into the mountains, where they were conquered by King Alexander many years later. Gottes Zukunft, penned by Heinrich von Neustadt circa 1300, called the enclosed country Caspia. Heinrich also wrote that the terrifying people of Gog and Magog, descended from Japhet, are the 10 tribes of Israel. Gosh, the hijack, logged by the Alexander, the Caspian Mountains. Gosh, the hijack, right? We know Japhet, it had nothing to do with the tribes of Israel. So that's the hijack they started taking probably. You know, they were probably claiming all that already back then. They were claiming to be the lost tribes, probably, these Gogs and Magogs. So these people were enclosed by Alexander, the Caspian Mountains. The Caucasus Mountains are meant. All right, listen to this. Around 1300, huh? The Caspian Jews are numerous and have large armies. Buch der Makaber by Ludger von Braunschweig, early 14th century, expanded upon the meaning of the legend. It said that Alexander's army came to the Caspian Mountains and met the 10 Israelite tribes, who were also called Red Jews. The Red Jews were already partially enclosed and thus imprisoned by the mountains because God had punished them for worshipping 2 golden calves made by their king Jeroboam. Alexander further trapped the Red Jews in these mountains by peeling boulders to form a great wall, because that's like saying that Alexander might not be a so-called Jew or an Israelite or Hebrew, right? And he was. But Alexander and his men were unable to complete the task of walling up the Jews, so he asked God to enclose the mountain entirely. Von Braunschweig wrote that God answered Alexander's prayer. Nevertheless, medieval Christians were concerned that Gog and Magog will break out of the Caucasus Mountains at the end of time and destroy the Christian world. All right, so Gog and Magog, that's not the 10 lost tribes. So, you know, I never saw this in the scripture. What are they reading? Who are these authors saying this? Von Braunschweig. In Juden Buchlein, all right, here's a book, early 16th century, Victor von Karben imagined a dialogue between a Christian and a Jew. He imagined. The Jew described the king of the Red Jews as a descendant of the tribe of Judah. Imagined, reminiscent of Elkanan the merchant's comment that Judahites ruled over the land of Kasdim, and said that the Caspian Mountains were located on the other side of Babylonia, bordering the sea that the Germans called the Wild Sea and that Jews called Sambashan. The waves of the Wild Sea were so fierce that it was impossible to navigate across it during the week. However, the sea rested from Friday at 6 o'clock p.m. until Saturday at 6 o'clock p.m. All right, so we got this story in the Prester John investigation. Shout out to 432. We got the real, more no hijack versions of all this. All right. The Red Jews could not cross during this time because they were observant the Sabbath. The fictional Jew in this dialogue lamented the perpetual imprisonment of the Red Jews between the sea and the mountains because only red Jewry could liberate the German Jews. At least one English writer picked up on the Red Jew story. In the 14th century, Hugh de Camden created a rhymed translation into Middle English of Sidrach, an Old French manuscript from the 13th century, concerning a conflict between the Eastern kings Bacchus and Garab, and the conversations Bacchus had with the sage Sidrach, which led to Bacchus' conversion to Christianity. The first portion of the text reads as follows. So the line, the red Jews from him spared, means the red Jews from him shut out. Thus the text refers to King Bakhtu's enclosure of the red Jews and to his building of a city, all right, of the Khazars, enclosing them. The Khazars, the hijacks, so-called Jews. Jewish folklore is also spun tales about red Jews. There were several key similarities between the Jewish and German legends. The red Jews were warriors who ruled a large kingdom and lived beyond a large sea or river called Sambashin. The historian Silo W. Barron suggested that the red Jews of the Jewish tales were the Khazars, not the 10 tribes, Khazars, who got enclosed. Now that's all your stories where they say, oh, they enclosed so-called white man in the cock. It wasn't the white man, it was the Khazars. It does seem very likely that the stories about the fiercely independent red Jews were vague memories of rumors about the powerful Khazar kingdom, transmitted in distorted form to German Christians. You see, distorted. They try to hijack the story. They try to say, oh, it was us because we were the 10 tribes. Alexander, oh, he got us. No, they try to distort the story. I told you, to German Christians who don't know nothing. Hakon Stang, however, expressed hesitation about the claim that the red Jews were definitely the Khazars. All right, it was definitely the Khazars they were talking about and who Alexander the Great entrapped in the Caucasus. Yet it is this, the existence of Khazar Jews, enough to establish word of red Jews? Huh? So yeah, you guys see, at the end we got the truth. Continuing says here the Khazars and the Huns. Again, we're still in the book, The Jews of Khazaria. We're in chapter 1. It says the original Hunnic Empire was established in Inner Asia in the 3rd century BC by the military commander Toman. It was greatly strengthened and enlarged during the reign of Motun, son of Tuman. Yet the empire of the Huns separated into northern and southern divisions in the middle of the 1st century CE or AD. The northern Huns began moving west after a major defeat inflicted upon them in 93 AD by the Hesipi Mongols. The Huns moved westward into southern Russia and Crimea by the 380s, taking possession of the lower Don River valley and the territory surrounding the Sea of Azov. Again, taking possession. Don, Dan, Danites. Priscus recorded that the Akatsirs, Akatsiroi, or Akatirs, Akatiroi, living near the Black Sea were subjects of the Huns. They were subjects. He wrote that Attila, king of the Huns, installed Kuridak as king of the Akatsirs around the middle of the 5th century. The Akatsirs also were in alliance with the Alans around this time. These are your Khazars. Some historians have thought that the Akatsirs might be ancestors of the Khazars. However, no solid evidence exists that would connect the Akatsirs with the Khazars, even though the anonymous author of the early medieval Ravenna cosmography had asserted just such a connection. In any case, Akatir is the original form of Akatsir, Akatsirs, and the Khazars. Oghur Turkic tribes, including the Onogurs, Saragurs, and Utigurs, crossed the Volga River and entered Europe around the year 463. Previously, the Ogurs lived in western Siberia and Central Asia, but they suffered a defeat at the hands of the Sibirs and were forced to migrate. The Oghuric Onogurs settled along the Don and Kuban rivers basins of the North Caucasus, as well as in the steppe lands north of the Kuban River up to the Don River. According to Peter Golden, the Oghurs were members of the Tiele tribal union mentioned in Chinese sources. These Oghuric newcomers apparently intermingled with the Akatsirs and the Huns. Indeed, scholars have often considered the Onogurs, Utigurs, and Kutrigurs of the Crimea and Panagoria to have been Huns. Now remember earlier, the 9 brothers, right? Those are progenitors of the Oghurs, the Bulgars, and all these people they're naming here. Anyway, so yeah, they're kind of connected. The Huns still controlled portions of the European steppe lands during the 6th century, including the Crimea. one of the Hunnic kings of the Crimea, named Grod, sought an alliance with the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. Grod adopted Christianity in 528 and melted many pagan idols. They became Christians, right? Gentile nations, converting them into silver and electrum coins. The Crimean Huns were dissatisfied with Grod, so they killed him and installed Mogul, his pagan brother, as their new king. An important consequence of this change in command was that Mogul reversed Grod's pro-Byzantine policies. Remnants of the Huns remained in the eastern Punic steppes and the northern Caucasus for many years, and some ventured into Romania. It is interesting that Christian of Stavelot considered the Jewish Khazari living in Gog and Magog to be Huns. This, however, is probably a generic use of the word Hun. One of the earliest factual references to the Khazars dates from the year 555, when an anonymous author 555, so generic, right, wrote a supplement attached to the Syriac translation of Greek church history of Zacharias Rhetor. In this supplement, the Khazars were listed among the nomadic tribes living in tents north of the Caucasus Mountains. Continuing in the book, The Jews of Khazaria, we're still in chapter 1. It says here, the Western Turkish Empire. For over 60 years, the Western Turks ruled the Khazars. The Western Blue, Turk Khaganate was founded in 552 by Ishtemi, the Jabgu Khagan, who was the brother of the supreme Turk Khagan Bumin. Ishtemi and Bumin were members of the Turkic Ashina dynastic clan. The headquarters of this vast empire was located near Lake Balkhash. In the year 567, hordes of Western Turks arrived on the Volga River region. They soon assumed control over the Sabirs, Onogurs, and Alans of the North Caucasus. By circa 570, the Khazars were under the jurisdiction of the Western Turkish Empire. The Western Turks took possession of the city of Bosporus, the future Kerch, from the Byzantine Empire in 576. The North Caucasian Huns also became subjects of the Western Turks. Additionally, Ishtemi's forces took control over the Iranian city-states of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Khawarizm in Central Asia. Ishtemi died in 575 or 576 and was succeeded by, or as Western Turkish Jabgu Khagan by his son Tardu, who lived until 603. Tardu eventually gained control over the Eastern Turks as well. In 601, Tardu's army unsuccessfully attempted to conquer the Chinese capital city of Chang'an. After Tardu's death, Chulo became Jabgu Khagan. Chulo's unsatisfactory performance led to revolts. His successor, Shikue, expanded the Western Turkish realm as far east as the Altai Mountains. Shikue also expanded the western frontier of his empire. His younger brother, Tang Yagu, reigned 618-630, known as Sibil by the Byzantines and Toong Shehu by the Chinese, continued the empire's expansion during his time as Jabgu Khagan. Tang Jabgu's capital, called 1000 Springs, was located east of the Talas River. Among his most important officials were the El-Tebers, Ebers, you see that? Ebers, who governed conquered peoples, and the Tuduns, who collected taxes. Tang Jabgu, a follower of Buddhism, was dedicated to the spread of Buddhist faith among his people. The famous Chinese Buddhist monk Xuanzang visited Tang Jabgu in 630 while on a pilgrimage. He observed that this great ruler wore a green satin robe and had very long hair, while his ministers wore embroidered robes, and his military attendants were dressed in furs, serge, and wool. The Karluks and other tribes revolted against Tang Jabgu, and he was killed by his uncle, known by the Chinese as Mohotu Hoi Chiuli Suipi, in 630. His uncle ruled as the Western Turkish Khagan during that year. These events led to a civil war, and the Western Turkish Empire broke apart during the 630s. The tribes of the North Caucasus found themselves in the midst of a major transition. After the disintegration of the Western Turkish Empire, the Khazars were able to reassert their independence because of all the conflicts that are going on, huh? What if they're causing all this chaos just so they can gain their independence? The formation of an independent Khazar kingdom. All right, again, we continue in chapter 1 in the book, The Jews of Khazaria. Tom Jagu's son established the independent state of Khazaria in 630s and 640s. The whole region between Volga and the fortress city of Derbent came into the possession of the Khazars. The Khazar Empire was multi-ethnic and multi-religious throughout its entire existence. Even as early as the 7th century, the Khazars assimilated with other tribes and confederations of the Caucasus. They assimilated, they assimilated, they became them. Assimilated. The Caucasus, such as the Sabirs, also known as Savirs or Suwars, the Saragurs, the Utigurs, the Sabenders, Samanders, and Balanjars, the great Ensers. These various people formed the mosaic of Khazarian life. It appears that the Sabirs living in Khazaria intermarried with a large portion of both the Khazar and Magyar tribes. Indeed, Al-Masudi reported that the Khazars were called Sabir in Turkic, but Khazarian in Persian. Okay? All the same people. And this is what I'm saying. Yeah, they might have originally, or some people that were Israelite, only, because they were trying to assimilate. But in general, they were mixing with all these Japhetic tribes, all these Turkish tribes, all these Asian, what they call them Persian, the people of Turan, ancient Turan, the Caucasus Mountains, Sumerians. All right, that's more of their ethnicity. The effect of Khazar expansion on the Bulgars. The Khazars soon became the dominant power in southern Russia. The expansion of Khazaria into new territories displaced other ethnic groups, most notably the Bulgars. But remember, they all come from the same Togarma, the Bulgars too. They're just displacing their own people. But possibly more original people to Noah, right? And then we got the hijacks, the Khazars, because they've been mixing. They probably carrying the seed of Cain too. The ethnonym Bulgar means mixed ones. All right, Bulgar means mixed in Turkic and derives from the Turkic word bulga, to mix. Thus, the Bulgars were actually a tribal confederation of multiple Hunnic, Turkic, and Iranian groups mixed together. During the winter, Bulgar men wore cone-shaped caps lined with fur, long fur coats with a belt at the waist, and boots. They had a custom of shaving off much of their hair except for a portion that was worn in a pigtail. Bulgar women wore white breeches and girdles with ornaments made from iron, glass, copper, coming from Michigan, and bone. The early Bulgars were divided into two groups, the Utigurs and the Kutrigurs. The Utigurs allied with the Byzantines and turned against their Kutrigur brethren. The two groups were engaged in bitter conflict during much of the 550s, while the Kutrigurs were defeated and absorbed by Avar invaders around 560. The Utigurs survived the Avar conquest. In the late 6th and early 7th centuries, the Western Turkish Khaganate took control over the Bulgar lands. The Bulgars fought this takeover unsuccessfully, and many died in battle. However, they established their independence from the Western Turks around the same time as the Khazars. The Bulgars established an independent state, Great Bulgaria, along the Don, Kuban, and Dnieper rivers by 630. The capital of Great Bulgaria was Fanagoria on the Taman Peninsula. Their top leader was Kubrat, a member of the Dulo clan of Western Turks, who belonged to the Bulgar Onogundur tribe. Khan Kubrat united all of the Bulgar and Hun tribes of the North Caucasus and the Sea of Azov region. Thus, in the 7th century, the major tribes constituting the Bulgars included the Onogundurs, the Duchi, the Kufi, the Kidarite Huns. During Kubrat's reign, Great Bulgaria maintained commercial and diplomatic ties with Khawarizm and Sogdiana in Central Asia, and also had relations with Persia. Han Kubrat died in 642. The Bulgars were no longer united, as several factions of the Bulgars had already migrated westward prior to 635. Three factions remained, each led by a son of Kubrat. A number of Bulgars remained in the territory of Great Bulgaria for centuries. They were ruled by Bayan, the first son of Kubrat. The Khazars conquered Great Bulgaria in 650. Theophanes wrote that these Bulgars paid tribute to the Khazars ever since their land became part of the Khazar Empire. Some of the other Bulgars were forced by the Khazars to flee to the Danube region in the Balkans. This migration was responsible for the formation of the Kingdom of Bulgaria. These Bulgars were led by Kubrat's third son, Asparuk, until his death in 701. An anonymous 7th century Armenian source, again anonymous, Armenian source recorded that after fleeing the Khazars, Asparuk, Bulgars initially settled on the island of Pevka, located at an estuary of the Danube. The Turkic Bulgars in Bulgaria decorated their yurts with embroidered panels such as hunting scenes. In 679-681, Asparuk and his group of Bulgars crossed the Danube and migrated south of Pevka, founding their new capital at Pliska. When Asparuk died in 701, Tervel became the new Khan of Bulgaria. The Bulgars of Bulgaria mixed with Slavs, and adopted Orthodox Christianity in 864. Only a few Turkic words remain in the modern Bulgarian language, which is most closely affiliated with Serbo-Croatian and Russian. Another group of Bulgars, led initially by Kubrat's second son, Kodrak, crossed the Don River and resettled east of it. Later in the 8th and 9th centuries, they settled along the middle Volga River region. Culturally and linguistically, the Volga Bulgars may have been closely related to the Khazars. On possible linguistic connections, the three Bulgar groups were named Barsula, Eskel, and Bulgar. The Volga Bulgars established a town along the upper Volga called Bulgar and made it the capital of their land. Their territory soon became a major trading hub. By the end of the 10th century, all of the residents of Bulgar were Muslims, and there was a major mosque there, The Bulgars also had a town called Suvar, situated near Bulgar on the Utkar River, and another important mosque was located there. Other major Bulgar towns were Kashan on the Kama River and Oshel on the Tiush River. The rulers of Volga Bulgaria had to pay tribute to the Khazar government up until the time of Khazaria's demise. The Khazar domination over the Volga Bulgars was also indicated by Al-Muqaddasi's inclusion of Bulgar and Suwar in his list of Khazar towns. Volga Bulgaria was a distinguished cultural and scholastic center. Many noted scholars and writers resided there, including the historian Yaqub ibn Noman al-Bulgari, author of A History of the Bulgars, composed in 1112 AD, and the poet Kulgali, author of Kisa-i Yusuf, A Tale About Yusuf, composed circa 1212. The Volga Bulgars were also important to the world of trade. The Bulgars exported furs, leather, footwear, timber, and other items to a variety of countries in Europe and Asia. They were also experts at working with gold, silver, bronze, and copper. Copper coming from Michigan. Bulgar architects were very skilled and built public buildings both in their home country and abroad, including Kievan Rus and Central Asia. Many Bulgar buildings, including mosque and a Khan's tomb, have been preserved up to the present day in Tatarstan. All right. And that's the end of this chapter, chapter 1 of this book. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first part. We're going to definitely continue in other parts reading these books. We got some really interesting chapters coming up. We haven't even got to the juicy stuff, right? So again, this is the end of part 1. Thanks for listening to the whole presentation, to me reading. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.